In the architecture of human relationships, betrayal is typically categorized as a structural failure. Statistically, infidelity is the second leading cause of divorce in the United States. It accounts for 20 to 40% of all marital dissolutions, depending on the demographic cohort analyzed by the American Psychological Association. When this fracture occurs within a high-value partnership, defined here as a union involving significant joint assets and public scrutiny, the standard damage control protocol is silence, followed by separation. The logic is sound. Silence minimizes reputational liability. However, this conventional wisdom ignores a psychological mechanism identified by Sigmund Freud in 1915 and later refined by modern narrative therapy. It is the concept of sublimation. This is the defense mechanism wherein socially unacceptable impulses or deep traumas are transformed into socially acceptable actions or creations. The most efficient method of repairing a fracture is not to hide it, but to externalize it, to turn the chaotic data of betrayal into a structured narrative. This is an investigation into the mechanics of that repair. We are not analyzing love in the romantic sense. We are analyzing the forensic timeline of a crisis management strategy that utilized artistic sublimation to avert a billion-dollar collapse. Our case study is the union of Sean Jay-Z Carter and Beyoncé Knowles Carter. Specifically, we will deconstruct the 3-year period between 2014 and 2017, the release of Lemonade and 4.44. The evidence suggests that by commodifying their trauma, they did not just salvage a marriage, they executed a textbook application of narrative reconstruction, rewriting the power dynamics of their partnership in real time. If you appreciate forensic case studies that dissect culture through the lens of psychology and economics, consider subscribing to this channel. This is an ongoing investigation into the hidden frameworks that govern human behavior. Welcome to the file. To understand the deviation, we must establish the baseline. In early 2014, the Carter brand was predicated on an impenetrable privacy. They were the outliers of the reality TV era, a power couple whose market value was derived from their perfectionism and discretion. Financially, the stakes were industrial. In April 2014, just weeks prior to the inciting incident, the couple announced their On the Run tour. This was a joint venture projected to gross over $100 million for a 19-show run. The extensive legal and merchandising contracts binding them created a scenario where a public split would involve catastrophic financial liquidity issues and breach of contract litigations. Then, the anomaly occurred. On May 5, 2014, following the Met Gala, security footage from inside an elevator at the Standard Hotel was leaked to TMZ. The video showed Solange Knowles, Beyoncé's sister, physically engaging Sean Carter while Beyoncé stood by. The footage contained no audio. This absence of data created an information vacuum. In crisis management theory, an information vacuum is almost always filled with speculation, which is destructive to the brand. On May 15, 2014, the family released a statement to the Associated Press. It read, in part, "We have moved forward as a united family." It was a standard corporate release, vague, protective, and designed to kill the news cycle. However, the internal reality was distinct from the PR strategy. In a 2017 interview with Dean Baquet for the New York Times Style magazine, Carter reflected on this specific period. He described the environment as a survival mode, stating, "So you go into survival mode, and when you go into survival mode, what happens? You shut down all emotions. So even with women, you're going to shut down emotionally, so you can't connect." The disconnection was the root cause. The elevator was the symptom. The On the Run tour proceeded, grossing $109 million, but the structural integrity of the partnership was compromised. They had two choices: liquidation, meaning divorce, or a radical restructuring. They chose the latter, utilizing the only tool they fully controlled, the recording studio.
The restructuring began 719 days after the elevator incident. April 23, 2016, Beyoncé releases Lemonade. It was not merely an album, it was an HBO visual film and a Tidal exclusive. The release strategy itself forced the audience to engage with the narrative on her terms. The album is structurally organized according to the Kubler-Ross model of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. In the track Sorry, the lyrics refer to Becky with the good hair, a moniker that instantly became a cultural shorthand for the other woman. But forensically, the identity of the third party is irrelevant. The relevance lies in the externalization of the betrayal. By releasing this content, Beyoncé took the tabloid speculation, which had been a liability, and converted it into an asset. Lemonade debuted at #1 on the US Billboard 200, selling 485,000 album-equivalent units in its first week. All 12 tracks charted on the Billboard Hot 100. Crucially, this aired on Tidal, a streaming service owned by Sean Carter. This is a vital economic detail. The public confession of his infidelity was directly monetized to benefit the estate he shared with the accuser. June 30, 2017, 433 days after Lemonade, Sean Carter responded. The album 444, produced entirely by No ID, served as the defendant's testimony. If Lemonade was the indictment, 444 was the allocution. In the title track 444, Carter raps, "I apologize, often womanize, took for my child to be born, see through a woman's eyes." This was a deliberate aesthetic pivot. While Lemonade was cinematic and expansive, 444 was claustrophobic and specific. Carter referenced the risk of losing his family and the specific shame of public exposure. In his interview with Dean Baquet, Carter explained the mechanics of this exchange. "We were using our art almost like a therapy session, and we started making music together." He admitted that playing the music for each other was uncomfortable, but necessary. The timeline concludes with the Everything Is Love joint album in 2018 and the On the Run 2 tour. That tour grossed $253.5 million. By airing the wound, they did not just heal it, they capitalized on the scar tissue. Why did this work? Why did this not devolve into a war of the roses? To understand the success of this strategy, we must look to the psychological principle of sublimation. In Freudian theory, sublimation is a mature type of defense mechanism where socially unacceptable impulses or idealizations are transformed into socially acceptable actions or behavior. However, in the context of a relationship, we are seeing a specific application of narrative therapy. Developed by Michael White and David Epstein in the 1980s, narrative therapy posits that people are not their problems. Rather, the problem is an external entity that disrupts the person's narrative. By creating albums, physical artifacts containing the story of the betrayal, the Carters externalized the infidelity. The cheating was no longer a secret cancer eating at the privacy of their home. It was a product on a shelf. It was a set of lyrics. It was an object they could both look at, critique, and ultimately sell. Dr. Esther Perel, a psychotherapist specializing in couples and erotic intelligence, argues that in the aftermath of an affair, a couple does not go back to their old marriage. That marriage is dead. They must build a second marriage, often with the same person. The albums Lemonade and 444 were the blueprints for that second marriage. Furthermore, we must consider the IKEA effect, a cognitive bias in which consumers place a disproportionately high value on products they partially created. By laboring through the uncomfortable process of co-creating the narrative of their pain, as Carter noted in the New York Times interview, they assigned a higher value to the relationship than if they had simply attended private counseling. The public nature of the art also acted as a commitment device. Once 444 was released, Carter had publicly bound himself to a narrative of repentance. To deviate from that narrative afterward would incur a massive social penalty.
To verify the efficacy of the Carter strategy, we must examine a control case where the principle of sublimation is ignored and the narrative was surrendered to third parties. Consider the dissolution of the marriage between Charles, Prince of Wales, and Diana, Princess of Wales. Like the Carters, this couple faced infidelity under extreme public scrutiny. However, their strategy was adversarial, not collaborative. In June 1994, Prince Charles admitted to adultery in a televised interview with Jonathan Dimbleby. In November 1995, Princess Diana responded with the infamous Panorama interview, stating, "There were 3 of us in this marriage." Unlike Lemonade and 4.444, which were dialogues between the couple presented to the public, these interviews were monologues aimed at the public to damage the other party. The result was the War of the Waleses. There was no sublimation of trauma into a shared creation. There was only the weaponization of the media. The net result was a loss of control, the destruction of the family unit, and a significant degradation of the institution they represented. The critical variable is agency. The Carters retained ownership of their master recordings and their story. Charles and Diana outsourced their story to journalists, Dimbleby and Bashir, losing agency in the process. One couple profited from their pain, the other was consumed by it. What do these forensic timelines suggest about the universal mechanics of relationship repair? The data points to a 3-step framework for processing betrayal, regardless of whether the audience is millions of fans or a single partner. Step 1, the acknowledgement of the fracture. Denial creates a debt that accumulates interest. The elevator moment, the point where the private dysfunction becomes undeniable, is necessary. As seen in the New York Times interview, Carter admitted the hardest thing was not leaving, but staying to face the reality of the behavior. Step 2, independent processing, or sublimation. Beyoncé created Lemonade alone. Jay-Z created 4.444 alone. They did not attempt to fix the relationship immediately. They fixed their own narratives first. They processed the anger and the shame independently, converting those raw emotions into structured arguments. Step 3, public reintegration. Only after the independent processing did they tour together. The reconciliation requires that both parties have regained their individual standing. The logical implication is that forget and forget is a flawed strategy. It implies erasure. The Carter case study suggests remember and reconstruct. The trauma must be metabolized, not ignored. Whether through art, therapy, or rigorous honest dialogue, the betrayal must be transformed into an object that can be examined. If it remains internal, it remains malignant. Looking at these events, one can observe patterns that appear across industries and decades. The instinct to hide failure is natural, but the evidence suggests that the controlled exposure of failure is what builds resilience. In your own history, where have cracks been plastered over with silence? When a breach of trust occurs, in a relationship, a business partnership, or within a family, the default reaction is often to minimize the event, to return to normal. But if the Carter data proves anything, it is that normal is the condition that caused the breach in the first place. The difficult question the data forces us to ask is, are we avoiding the conversation to save the relationship? Or are we avoiding the conversation to save our own comfort? The former is strategic. The latter is a delay of inevitable collapse. In 2018, during their joint tour, the screens behind the couple displayed a simple message: "This is real life." It was a declaration that the polished image of 2013 was the illusion, and the scarred, reconstructed reality of 2018 was the truth. They demonstrated that while trust is fragile, the shared work of repair creates a bond that is arguably stronger and certainly more tested than the naivete of new love. Pain is inevitable. The waste of that pain is optional. If you found value in this investigation, I invite you to subscribe for the next case file. Case closed.